Welcome everyone to the closing plenary of the conference. Thank you to AIA and President Peter Exley and CEO Robert Ivy for their partnership. Big thank you to the conference co-chairs for organizing this terrific conference and bringing us all together. Rico Quirindongo with the City of Seattle Office of Planning and Community Development, and Georgine Theodore, Professor of Architecture at New Jersey Institute of Technology. Thank you to the AIA staff and ACSA staff who have been working on the conference for the past year and hiding in the background at all of our sessions. Thank you to all of the authors, presenters, and speakers. Your research and presentations have informed insightful discussions and ideas. Finally, thank you to all the moderators and reviewers for your time and commitment. The theme of the conference picks up on many of ACSA's strategic initiatives, the top of which is how architecture and architectural education can better work to correct injustice, improve on promoting healthy built environments, and how we have learned from the pandemic. ACSA is also devoted to working with communities, improving communities, and encouraging the development of long-standing sustainable communities. We hope you have enjoyed the conversations, made new connections, and learned of new methods and areas of research and practice. Please keep an eye out for next year's AIA ACSA Intersections.
Well, Robert's audio seems to have cut out there. I'm going to pick it up, and if he comes back in, we'll let him finish. Hi, everyone. I'm Nadav Malin with Building Green, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this closing plenary session. Really looking forward to it, and really appreciated the conversations and great information that's been shared so far at this conference. And I think this closing session is going to be a great closing, a great punctuation on the end of that. So I'm going to start by introducing our two speakers for this session. Nikisha Glover is the Think 100% organizer for Hip Hop Caucus, a climate justice practitioner, thought leader, tech advocate, and community engagement expert. Nikisha actively develops strategies across activism, films, music, and podcasts to engage and activate millennials, Gen Z, artists, entertainers, community leaders, entrepreneurs, politicians, and other climate experts to help make Think 100% the coolest place in the climate movement. She's been recognized as a 2019 GRIST 50 Fixer with a 2019 Martin Luther King Jr. Growing the Dream Award and the 2016 Clean Air Carolina Airkeeper Award, joining North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, Dr. James Kenney, and other business leaders. Nikisha is from Charlotte, North Carolina, holds a biology degree from University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And also with us is Crystal Bullock. Crystal is a public health practitioner who addresses health disparities exacerbated by climate impacts to enhance community health resilience. She received her bachelor's in public health with a minor in chemistry and Africana studies from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and a master's in neuroscience from Wake Forest University, concentrating in health disparities. She has led projects around environmental justice in the Washington, D.C. metro area and Baltimore, Maryland. Specifically, she's addressed toxicology in the Anacostia River, impacting children's health and cognitive development, air quality, benefits of community gardens in food insecure neighborhoods, as well as heat island research. Crystal advanced the innovative project 1890 Land Grant Environmental Justice Academy, which recruited students from 1890 land grant universities in a year-long partnership with the Environmental Protection Agency to engage students in environmental and climate justice outreach, research, and community development. As a result of this work, Crystal was a featured speaker at the 2018 and 2019 National Environmental Justice Conference. Crystal currently serves as Think 100% Climate Justice Fellow at Hip Hop Caucus, where she contributes her expertise across local to international climate and environmental justice coalitions, advancing Think 100% climate priorities. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nikisha and Crystal. Take it away.
Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. We are excited to be here to talk with this particular conference today. So we want to first off, let me just give you a little bit of a setup that we thought we would do with our time together today. Thank you again for the introductions. We figured we would do a chat check-in question. We'll do some Q&A, and then we'll close things out. So Crystal, would you like to get that chat check-in question going?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nikisha, and thank you, Nadeed. I'm very excited to be here and very excited to share Hip Hop Caucus and our background in environmental and climate justice with you all. So I would love for everyone to stay engaged throughout this presentation, just kind of pull some of the things from the chat regarding equitable communities, healthy communities, post-pandemic communities, which, by the way, welcome to the world of Zoom. You might be hearing construction in my neighborhood. So post-pandemic communities right here, right now, and our zero carbon communities and community localism. So we would love for you also put in the chat some of the things that you pulled throughout this entire conference to further our discussions as well. So I attended some of the events myself, so I'll also be putting in the chat some of the things that I pulled out. So just to get us started, we'd love to see that engagement.
Thank you so much. And while you all are doing that, we will definitely read through them. I want to go ahead and give you all a little bit of background about Hip Hop Caucus. Now that you know a little bit about Crystal and myself, let me tell you a little bit about Hip Hop Caucus. So when we talk, when you think of hip meaning current, hop meaning to move, and caucus meaning to do it together. That is a theme that runs through everything we do at Hip Hop Caucus. Established in 2004, Hip Hop Caucus has served to represent the hip hop community's interests and policy that affects Black and Indigenous and people of color communities in the United States. Our mission is to use the power of cultural expression to empower communities who are first and worst impacted by injustice. And we have a vision for racial justice, healthy communities, and a healthy planet. And it fuels what we mean when we say all power to the people. A little bit about the brands of Hip Hop Caucus that you may hear about or may be familiar with, or in the future, as you think about Hip Hop Caucus, these will be some of the areas that you'll get to know. We have Hip Hop Caucus overall, but then our brands include Hip Hop Caucus Think 100%. We have our Respect My Vote department. We have Hip Hop Caucus Good Trouble, and then our Justice Paid in Full department. Crystal and I are in roles with the activism team of Think 100%. So today's focus, today's focus and our conversation is really rooted in the Think 100% body of work. We are, everything that deals with climate, it touches our particular department. So for us, Think 100% is a platform for multicultural millennials and Generation Z who care about justice and our planet. They want information about the climate crisis and solutions, but they find that the mainstream climate and environmental movement does not speak to them or align with their values. Think 100% is about justice, solutions, and realness using film, podcasts, music, and activism. For us, it's not depressing. It's about the beauty of our world and the tenacity of fighting for our existence. Our work, we feel that it embodies an aspect of giving you life, energy, and inspiration. We interact and engage artists, entertainers, community leaders, entrepreneurs, politicians, and experts, again, to make Hip Hop Caucus or excuse me, to make Think 100% the coolest place in the climate movement. So a little bit more about our values as Think 100%. We value solutions that are envisioned by communities first and worst impacted. We believe that communities should really own their own solutions. Justice through solutions that create equity and end extraction and exploitation. And then we're real. We speak truth to power, we're genuine, and we value integrity. So under the Think 100% brand, I mentioned in the introduction about films, activism, podcasts, and music. This is just a little bit of the way in which we're set up to do our work. Activism influences all our activism and the climate work. It shapes and informs the work that we do through podcasts, films, and music. I'll give you a little bit more about that quickly. With film, we have a couple of films that we are taking on. We produce short and long form videos and movies. Currently, we have Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave as one that we are in several different film festivals for. And this is a climate comedy. So for us, we use our platform to translate some of our issues that we're dealing with in a way that relates and engages those multicultural millennials that we spoke to in our target audience. And so Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave, we brought in comedians to tell the story of the climate crisis in the Hampton Roads, Virginia area. And I'll be sure to drop the link in the chat where you can access, to be able to access those, to access the film through the film festivals that we are participating in. We also have another film project that we're working on, and it's more documentary style, and that's Underwater Projects. That one we are working on completing, but we do have a trailer that's available to see. We also have our podcast. We like to think of the coolest show being a master class on climate and climate justice. I know that Catherine Coleman Flowers was one of your speakers last year. She has been featured on our podcast, and a whole host of other guests that really speak to climate in a way that again centers the communities who are most impacted. We also on Fridays have our radio show on 89.3 FM in the Washington, D.C. area, #Climate Friday. However, if you're not in the D.C. area, you can catch our radio show streaming through our website as well. And then Think 100% Music. Each week we showcase a playlist of movement music where you can sign up for that playlist and use that to be the soundtrack of your day and your week and the work that you do, and let that be inspiration for you. In 2014, we also produced launched the People's Climate Music, which included an album called Home, and you can find that information on our website as well. So that's a little bit about Hip Hop Caucus. Want to go ahead and turn it back over to Nadav so that we can get into the Q&A portion that we're really excited to talk about, this lens of climate justice and architecture.
Thank you, Nikisha. That was great. So you've already touched on this a little bit, but let's kick it off by just clarifying for folks, what do you mean when you say climate justice? What is climate justice?
This is, for me, one of those foundational things that I think shapes my work personally, and I think also the work of Hip Hop Caucus. Climate by definition, if you've ever taken the time to go and look up the definition of climate, climate by definition is the condition of our land, it's the condition of our air, it's the condition of our water, and it's the condition of our people. And talking about it in those terms gives us the permission and the language that's needed to talk about climate justice and how it relates to our lived experience and the other ways that it manifests. So we've all talked about the political climate, we've all talked about the education climate. So I think for a lot of people, they think of the term climate as just the weather outside, or the 1.5 degrees centigrade that we're trying to avoid reaching. Well, we know that it's deeply connected when we talk about climate justice. For Hip Hop Caucus, climate justice is racial justice, and these things are connected.
Great. Crystal, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, and just to completely amplify what Nikisha said, but also highlighting what you put in the chat, Adib, how, this has to be more than just building buildings and designing buildings, right? When it comes to climate justice, everyone plays a part of it, and everyone can play a part as a leader into solutions to climate justice, but making sure that because we know everyone's not being impacted by this climate crisis equally. Like, their underserved communities are served even worse and have worse conditions because of the climate crisis we're in. So it's beyond, like Nikisha said, like what people think with just what's going on with the weather, or saving the sea turtles by changing our straws. Those things are important, but this is truly life or death for certain communities. So just acknowledging that we all play a role in how we contributed to the climate crisis, but also we all have to play a role into solutions.
Absolutely. And so to get more specific on that, Crystal, how can architects and planners best engage with members of a community to ensure their projects really meet the needs of all residents?
Sure. Well, you have to define what is your role as a community member, and are you a part of the community, or are you an external force for that community, or are you actually a community member yourself? By definition, in your field, architects build, design, oversee, and advise, and it's all about using all of those tools that you have and being a leader and being in community. And if you're not in the community and you're kind of this external force coming into this community, it's all about who has ownership of your projects and who are you inviting to the table to make sure that there's access for everyone. Collaborating with some of your non-traditional partners, like public health professionals, and some of the presentations we heard throughout the conference, public health and architecture overlap, and they come together for solutions for equitable and healthy communities for all. And, being an advocate and being a voice for addressing climate justice through policy and legislation. As designers, you can partner maybe with minority and women-owned businesses that can consciously identify opportunities to bolster local economy when selecting or advising like a consultant team or a marketing team, and celebrating wins along the way. When you do invite those community members, have them actually involved and make sure you're celebrating them throughout. The myth that, architects are at the mercy of whoever is funding it is true to an extent of whatever project is going on. But, having social justice and climate justice in the forefront of your projects can go a long way, and it changes the culture.
That's great. Yeah. And then do you want to say a little more maybe about the role of architects and urban planners in the solutions specifically for climate justice?
Yeah. So I think to be a part of the solution, you have to acknowledge the first of how you contributed to the cause of things. So historically, urban planning and architecture have contributed to heat island impact and energy disparities. And we know with climate change and climate variability, those that are already impoverished are just get off worse and exacerbate those inequalities. So acknowledging some of the history in the past of what has happened with urban planning and architects and climate justice is, to me, the first step in order to be a part of the solution. But all of that, I think this conference is one of the first steps of how to create that solution, right? Like teaching it in academia and then translating the research, which that's a struggle in every field in general, is what you learned in school and practice and then actually executing in the field. You know, there's some differences there, but when you have historical things like the Bahalia pipeline and different pipelines that are going on, or like petrochemical plants that are in fact in Louisiana, Texas, and Ohio River Valley area, you know, that was all done with architects as well and urban planners. They were a part of that. Or with the Norfolk area in Virginia is sinking underwater and flooding, you know, where those neighborhoods were strategically placed. So while those things are happening, the best we can do right now in this is have these honest conversations, changing the mindset and changing the field a little bit, and just having social justice in mind when projects are happening. Who am I impacting? Who's going to, like, when I leave this community, who will this benefit, or will this worsen communities? Have I talked to community members to see what they want here, or how can we best use this project for everyone? And does everyone have access to these projects? So just simply having these conversations and actually taking it and implementing in the field goes a long way.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And Nikisha, turning it over to you, are you aware, are there specific issues that you can think of that architects might miss if they focus more narrowly, you know, thinking, as you already talked about, how climate is really more than just the atmosphere, but if architects are thinking about climate, you know, from that atmospheric perspective and working on that without engaging local community, what might they be missing?
There's a lot missed. And you know, how are we designing for the community and the benefit of the community if the community is not heard, or we're not creating intentional spaces and opportunity to listen to the community? And I think Crystal mentioned a little bit earlier about inviting community to the table, but I'm gonna say that it's not always about inviting community to the table. Sometimes what you're serving on that table is not digestible for communities because you are the expert, and it's almost like speaking a foreign language. Like, you all are bilingual. You're bilingual in the aspect of you understand the architecture industry and you understand the language that's there, and for that we commend you. But you also speak English in a way in which you become the translator that can go in and engage with community and find opportunities to plug in and support the work that communities are leading. And then with your expertise and the tools and the resources that you have access to, you can strengthen what the community is already doing and is already leading and is already saying they have a need for. We stand by, as the environmental justice and health practitioners that we stand by the fact that communities who are most impacted are also the ones that are closest to the solutions. And so if we know that communities are closest to the solution, why are they not being engaged in the entire process? Not as an afterthought, not as we designed this for you on your behalf. No, from the very beginning, and seeing community members as experts of their lived experience. I think that's what's important. I think it's important that we have common language. Crystal and I were talking before this presentation, how we value the conversation in these spaces around language and being able to have a common language, because I know there's terms like climate smart goals out there. Well, if that's not something I engage with every day, how do I communicate to you what my needs are if you're approaching it with only terms that are unfamiliar or not in the day-to-day lived experience for communities?
Super. Yeah, that's right on. I'm going to go to Crystal for one more question and then open it up to everyone for some thoughts and questions. So feel free to use the raised hand feature in Zoom if you'd like to ask Nikisha or Crystal a question or share a thought. And Crystal, if you could share, what does a climate justice win look like in your experience?
Sure. A justice win look like for me is truly having just social justice and climate justice in the forefront from academia to practice and make sure that it's actually translated. Like us first discussed earlier, acknowledge the history, especially with the architecture and the urban design community, not working with communities, coming in, doing something, then leaving, but actually shifting that mindset and actually use your voice as community leaders. Architects are not just, whatever, working in silos. That is something that's common in various industries, but, kind of breaking down these silos and working together to create a different narrative and create change is what I would want to see, healthy, clean neighborhoods that have, all this access to, fresh grocery stores and that are walkable and making sure that it's well lit. So if the people are walking at night, they're able to actually see and feel safe. And, just making sure that community members feel heard and it's collaborative versus just like a top-down approach to them, and having sustainability in mind in everything that you build. So addressing or being knowledgeable of like higher energy burdens and making sure that that's, kind of mediated for all people, but especially those underserved communities, and making sure that energy efficiency and clean energy is in those communities and available, and possibly like providing clean economy and making sure that there's economic opportunity and foster equity with everyone that's on the team. Talk to, when you're coming into a neighborhood, see who you can partner with locally and try to support those different demographics that, again, who are not your traditional partners having them. So that would be a win to me, is making sure that there's cleaner energy, sustainable communities and healthy communities everyone is receiving the benefits of having a cleaner environment and a cleaner economy and a healthier and sustainable community, that everyone's receiving those benefits. And Nikisha, feel free to also tag in on what you would consider a win.
Yeah, I wanted to add, like, that was great, Crystal. The other thing that I want to add, I think there's an opportunity to reflect on the access that the architecture industry and community has. And in the spaces in which there is an overabundance of access and resources, and how do we share that? Or how do we create pathways to share that with communities? When we talk about under-resourced and overburdened communities, what is the access that you all have, the overabundance that you all have, that you can begin to open up and share with communities? So I know this conference in particular is about research. There are a lot of communities right now who can benefit from the access to research that you have. How are you partnering with those communities? That is a win for not only your work, but that is a win for the community as a whole. And then this conversation around community, and I just want to reiterate what's already been said. You all are a part of the community. I think sometimes in academia and some of these I've heard academia referred to as ivory towers in the past. Sometimes there's a sense of being outside of the community, although you live and work or go to school in these same areas, but you are a part of the community. It's not an over there issue. It's I'm a part of this community, and how do I bring my gifts and my talents and my resources to be a part of the community and create those pathways, again, to the access that you have in the form of resources, infrastructure, education, and power. And how do we create that in a way that's going to build up just and equitable communities? For me, that's the win.
That's great. I feel like both of you have just really reinforced and contextualized a lot of the themes that people have been talking about throughout this conference. A really, really great way of bringing it home. So now it's everyone else's turns. Anyone have specific questions for Nikisha or Crystal you'd like to share? Please use the raised hand feature. And if no one's jumping in to do that, I'm going to pick up on what Crystal started with the chat feature and invite everyone to just think back to what you just heard now, or sessions you were in earlier today or over the last couple of days, and just what stayed with you. What are you going to carry forward from everything you've heard, and how might you be thinking about applying it, whether it's in your next research project, in your classroom, and you're on a design project you might be involved in. What are you taking from this conference that might be actionable, that you can share and inspire others with? So feel free
I'll
to
jump in, Nadav, and just ask a question. Come on, guys, get engaged. Ask questions. We got these great speakers with us. Nikisha, you're saying that you have, or I think 100% was sort of conceived as being a way to speak with millennials or a younger generation. Do you see a lot of hope in their world? Are they hopeful for the future? Are they feeling sort of oppressed by the world that they've inherited? Or what's your sense? What do you see from working with younger people?
I think Crystal and I both can answer this question. So I'll start by saying the youth are on fire. And they are fighting for our future. And sometimes we need to get out their way and support them. And I think that's that access conversation we were just having. The access and the overabundance and the information, the resources, all these things that we have access to. How do we create pathways for youth to be able to tap into this access that we all have in a way that supports and drives the change that we need to incorporate climate justice into our overall work. So that's what I'll say, but let me in a sense invite Crystal to answer that one as well.
Yeah, as a millennial, a proud millennial, I think I would easily say the generation behind me, Gen Z, same thing. They're very amped up, and they are coming and attacking climate in very innovative ways, and they're using the platforms that they do have to address some of these issues and really tackling the climate crisis in a very creative way. I know social media can be a blessing and a curse, but it is truly a way to touch and reach them, and they are using what they do have in order to amplify the message. So while they are like fueled and fired up about it, like, gosh, this is the climate we inherited, what can we do about it, versus being deflated and defeated, which is something big in Hip Hop Caucus, like Nikisha talked about. We are not an organization of doom and gloom, it's like, this is what's happening. What are we going to do about it? Who do we have in the fight with this? And I think, like Nikisha said, kind of get out of their way and just see how you can help. And, they're eagles to learn, but also you got to be eager to listen and hear what they have to say about it.
Yeah, and while I have the mic, I'll just encourage everybody to go back and watch. We had a students and sustainability session yesterday. The students were presenting some of their scholarship and research. If you get a chance, go back and watch that presentation to everybody in the audience. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. I'll add to that. I think we need to value everyone's contribution. And I think that hits on exactly what you're saying about the youth. So I think sometimes, culturally, American culture wise, there's been children are to be seen and not heard mentality. I'm from the South, so that's something that you hear in the South. But I think the opportunities that we have before us are to value everyone's perspective and contribution to the conversation, because we're all being impacted, and we need to understand how young people are being impacted as well as our seniors. artists, and everyone in between.
I agree.
So I wanted to also ask you to touch on the role. I've really been impressed by the power of art. You're working with film, with music, with all these different media, but the power of art and music in particular to sometimes cut through with a message where just straight narrative, straight data doesn't, people don't hear it, they gloss over, they shut it out. Sometimes art can hit people directly in their hearts a little more and get a message through. How are you guys using that within or seeing the impact of that in your work with Hip Hop Caucus?
Well, we like to use a term called artivists, which are artists who are also activists.
Yeah.
And they are master. I am not an archivist, but they are masters of storytelling or using visual art in order to get the message across. Because completely understand, coming in academia, like data, numbers, statistics, people are like, oh, okay, that I don't know what that means, or that doesn't mean anything. But sharing a story or rapping, having a poem, or showing a documentary. The documentary Nikisha mentioned, Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave, it talks about the Norfolk area and how we, in African-American culture, turning lemons into lemonade, and how do we use comedy as a way to soothe some of our sorrows, but also, again, bring people together. And it's a documentary that uses comedy, and it talks about climate change, which are things that seem to be completely independent, but they come together and intersect to discuss what's going on in the Norfolk area and how it's sinking and the flooding and how climate change is really impacting that community, especially the St. Paul area of Norfolk. And I think art resonates with everyone, regardless if you're a music person or you like podcasts or you like film or comedy, visual arts. As you mentioned, Eve, it can just touch. I think art is a way to reach everyone universally.
And if we've got time, I've got the clip from our trailer up that we can actually not only talk about it, but we can show you what we mean and how we use art and creative culture to really advance the conversation around climate. Do we have time for a 2 to 3 minute clip on that?
Absolutely, Nikisha. Let's go with it. Yeah.
Okay. Y'all let me know if there's any sound issues.
Bringing kids in this world is scary. I'm thinking about buying my boys a kayak, Can you imagine somebody taking a kayak to a shop and go, that's stupid?
And I want to tell you just a report from these white climate crisis rooms, what they worry about. Straws, sea turtles, Black people. It's not a good order.
I went to Howard, so I made my decision and stuck to it, okay? I just want to brag, though. Howard had a swim team. Y'all might want to get on top of that.
I'm already crying. Then the police there. I'm calming down. Police walking. They too used to shoots, man. They walk me out to the car. They're like, hey, was it right here? I'm like, they still in the area. Why are you trying to get me to Takashi myself?
So I braid hair too. Anybody where the Black women at in here? I feel a little self-conscious for saying it and my hair not braided because people be like, oh, you braid hair, do you? A
lot of beautiful Black women in here, nice hair, but you gotta watch those sea levels. If you get too high, everybody gonna have to go natural.
And what's special about this particular film? We engaged with people from the area, people who are directly impacted. The film is directed by a Black director. It was filmed at the historic Addicts Theater and the history that that has to the Hampton Roads, Virginia area. And so these things are not done in isolation. There's an ecosystem that is allowed when we are able to introduce and infuse other forms and art forms into the conversation about climate.
So glad you shared that, Nikisha. That's really cool. Can't wait to see the whole thing. And so I want to, in a few minutes, we have 20 minutes left here in our scheduled time. And a lot of this conference really has provided all kinds of opportunities for people to connect and talk in smaller groups in the lounge and other things. So I think we could just take 5 minutes and do that one more time and get people into some small breakout rooms where you can share. And so we're going to put you into rooms in threes and ask you in your threesome to just, again, share a key takeaway, share something you've just heard, you're going to carry forward into your work, and then come back prepared to put something in the chat that we can all look at from the three of you and take away from this conversation. So ready? Yes, it's going to be random. We're all going to be in these rooms. So get ready to meet some new friends and share some thoughts here for a few minutes. I had a lot of fun. I had a great conversation with a couple of people I hadn't met before. I hope others did as well. And really want to encourage everyone now to just take a moment and put a thought in the chat from the conversation you just had. Share a highlight, something that someone said that struck you. I'm going to just be quiet here for a minute and give everybody a chance to do that. All right, this is great. We're going to capture all of these thoughts and memorialize them for the takeaways from this conference. Thank you. Anyone inspired to unmute and share a little bit, build a little bit more on what you just put in the chat, provide a little more context?
I can go, if you can hear me.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I said, I attended every day. The one that stuck out to me was Jeanette Kim's Rules of the Game. She has a literal game for students to participate in all the joys of conflicting policies when they enter practice. That was, so my literal takeaway is I reached out because I would like to get that game for my students, but there was also another speech that mentioned the fact that most of us that practice deal with policy and politics every day. But I personally, we never talk about it in my studios I teach. And that seems like such an obvious gap that I didn't see till now.
Yeah, I heard that in a few places over the last couple of days that architects need to get much more engaged with policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Creates the rules of the game. That's great.
So that would be my takeaway from it.
Yeah. Susan, are you up for sharing a little of what you were just sharing with Joanna and I around experience with how people experience architecture?
Sure. You know, I guess one of the things that we talked about, or that I came up in a conversation that I was having about equity earlier this year, is that when we start talking about how we design for communities, our profession tends to recognize the stuff that's really provocative, but you know, people interact with architecture every day, whether they want to or not. They're in buildings, and if we're going into the more economically challenged areas, and we're designing, real basic boxes, because that's the cheapest thing that we can design. Why would anyone who lives in one of those communities think that architecture would be a viable profession? Right? So we need to be exposing everyone in all communities to good design.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. All right. I want to specifically also open the door for Rico and Georgine. You, as conference chairs, I know put a lot of thought into the entire program and putting it together. Do you have any thoughts you want to share in the last few minutes here of our session?
Well, I was going to add to the last comment. We need to be presenting excellent examples of good architecture, not only to lead the way by example, but also to do well by community, right? And I think that I put it in the chat, but I think that work has to be collaborative and not extractive, which was part of the discussion I think that was had during this excellent closing session today. So I just want to thank our panelists that spoke today. And I just added Hip Hop Caucus Uprising to my Spotify playlist. So thank you for that too.
All right, thanks, Rico. And Crystal just posted the link there and some particular shows. Thank you, Crystal.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm trying to capture all the links, but just to start off with the podcast, The Coolest Show, we have a transportation series if people are interested, but here are a few episodes that I just picked up from each season that I think could be helpful and kind of reflect some of our discussion today.
Super, thank you. Georgine, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I want to thank all the people at the ACSA and the AIA who, are not headlined in the proceedings, but really made the whole thing happen. And I know that I worked really closely with both Eric and Melanie, and then also Michelle and a number of other people. And so I just wanted to thank you for making this job as easy as it possibly could be. So thank you. And I also really want to thank Rico. It's been amazing to get to know you and to work with you. And
likewise.
Yeah, I hope we get to collaborate again. But I think that you asked about, not if you asked about like what we took away, and the plenary that we had earlier today, we were talking about community localism and all the things that people do that are really very specific to the places and people where they're working. And the panelists talked about this concept of scaling out instead of scaling up. And I really see that as an interesting metaphor for what we're all doing here, which is that we're all doing, our practices and our work, but a conference like this allows us to network with one another and to learn about the really kind of amazing things that people are doing, and that without kind of homogenizing what we do, we can be more impactful by having these connections with people around the country and around the world who are committed to making communities better and more equitable and more beautiful and more sustainable. So I thought that I was really kind of inspired by that conversation and about everything that I heard over the past couple of days. So look forward to, my comment in the chat was like, looking forward to being in person. I really relish and appreciate the opportunity to connect with different people and learn about what they're doing. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Georgine. And I think with that, I just want to add my thanks to Nikisha and Crystal. It was awesome chatting with you and getting to know you a little bit. And Michelle, are you going to share any thoughts as we close out here? Uh-oh, she's looking at me like, why are you putting me
No,
on
I'm
the-"
gonna let Mike do our closeout, but I would end with if there's any kind of parting thoughts from our esteemed speakers, Crystal and Akeisha, about challenging us on anything, and then passing it off to Mike. With you've got the diehards still in the room. So just a final comment before Mike takes it over.
I would just challenge and encourage everyone to take everything from this conference and actually implement it and use it into practice or into academia curriculum in the future. Conferences, we do a lot of great discussion and then we break and it's like, oh, we're talking about the same issues next year. So yeah, I hope this conversation continues about climate justice and social justice. And I just hope everything that you all have learned today in the discussions you take them into practice. Nikisha?
I like the perspective of commitment. What are, right now in this moment, what's the one or two things that you can commit yourself to that are actionable? There's a lot of information and great resources that have been provided throughout the entire conference. And by making this commitment, it doesn't mean that you have to put on a superhero cape and conquer everything by yourself. With the gifts that you have, embrace those gifts because they are needed in the community. And what is the one or two things that you can commit to doing? For us at Hip Hop Caucus, we invite you to, one, consider donating to Hurricane Ida relief. 100% of the resources that have been raised and matched are going directly in the hands of people who are still dealing with the devastation of Hurricane Ida. And the path of Hurricane Ida is also a path in which we know these communities were devastated by Hurricane Katrina. These communities in the Louisiana corridor, they have Cancer Alley because of the petrochemical industry. And so these are things that communities are dealing with that are cumulative impacts, where we have hurricanes and extreme weather that already exacerbates the things that we talked about, like urban heat islands that Crystal mentioned earlier, or pipeline infrastructure that's going into Black and Brown communities. So I just wanted to give a plug that communities are still being impacted because of Hurricane Ida relief, and we are directly getting those resources on the ground as Hip Hop Caucus. Also, please follow our channels. We're on all the platforms as Hip Hop Caucus. And Crystal already shared with you our link to the podcast. Put it on while you're exercising or doing housework. Please share with others. And lastly, for those of you who are interested in catching the film Ain't Your Mama's Heat Wave, we are actively in a film festival. That's the only way you can watch the film right now. We're actively in a film festival. So if you click that link that was provided in the chat, you'll be able to attend by way of film festival and not only see our film, but see films that we're a part of. But we want to thank you. This has been an incredibly rich discussion. Thank you for utilizing your platform that is really, really, on the outside, people would think it's really dedicated to architecture only, but being able to open up your platform to also expand and talk about climate justice, these are the kind of conversations and the kind of work that we need to do more of. So thank you so much.
Akeisha, that's so wonderful. And thank you, Crystal, too. There are so many ways to segue out of this. But first I want to thank Nikisha Glover and Crystal Bullock from Hip Hop Caucus for this great session. I want to thank Nadav Malin and Candace from Building Green
Candace Pearson from Building Green for being great facilitators for us. This is the second year that ACSA has made its fall conference a partnership with AIA. These intersections conferences grew out of the intersection symposiums that we've been having in conjunction with AIA's Conference on Architecture. And it's been wonderful to essentially expand the brand and reach an even bigger audience. And I think that, after all these years, we're starting to develop an extended community of people who are committed not just to the intersection of education and practice, but they see architecture as, just as Nikisha was saying, architecture is a lot more than about just buildings. It's about people, it's about relationships, and we can use the power of architecture and design to make the world better for everybody. So thank you to the many people out there who have been to more than one of these intersections events. For those of you who are here for the first time, we want to keep you coming back. So next year, we plan to do a third installment of the Intersections Research Conference themed around resilience. So there's the Hurricane Ida segue. The call for abstracts will be out later this year with a submission deadline in spring of 2022. We want to thank co-chairs Georgine Theodore and Rico Queridongo. They were generous with their time. Their deep networks and experience were also essential to the success of this conference. And last but of great importance, I want to recognize the ACSA and AIA staff, who are now a community of their own because they've been working on these conferences for multiple years. So from AIA, thank you to Michelle Rousseau, Managing Director for Research and Practice, Melanie DeCola, Manager for Architectural Research, and Nisa Dolan-Brown, Director for Higher Education at the AIA. You're wonderful partners to work with. We really do enjoy it, and we think it really complements both of our organization's missions. From ACSA, I want to thank a long list of staff who were working either up front or in the background. Eric Ellis is our Senior Director of Operations and Programs, and he's done a wonderful job on this, along with Michelle Sturgis, who's Conferences Manager, who they help set up the technology, they nag the authors, they nag the speakers, they nag the peer reviewers. They're our chief naggers. Edwin Hernandez, Danielle Dent, Amanda Gann, and Madeline Creef are all ACSA staff members who were producing the sessions that were happening during this conference. We appreciate your time and effort and patience in working with this. So we want to see you back next year, and we want you to follow through on all the things that Crystal and Nikisha were suggesting. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you again.